Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today we have the individual who was previously my good friend, but now is my good friend and PPC candidate, Jim McMurtry. Welcome, Jim.
Well, it's great to be here, Payman.
Yeah, welcome to the family, Jim.
Thank you.
Jim, yeah, that's pretty exciting news. I heard about it that you were considering joining, and then so you finalized. So, what's it like? Do people have yet another reason to hate you now?
One of the things that I've enjoyed in this process is that I don't feel hated. I know there are people that have turned their backs on me, including in my own family, including in my friend group, and that's happened to many people, obviously, during this new bipolarization that political correctness and wokeism and so on have brought about. I think we're very much on one of two camps in a lot of different issues, and we've lost the ability the art of disagreeing. So I generally I'm feeling very positive. I'm just extremely excited at this moment. I'm writing a book. I've sent it to my case. I've sent it to the printers. Conrad Black has written a foreword for me. I'm getting other Canadians of note and importance in the fight against woke indoctrination within our institutions to write a review as well. I had two choices, Payman, and that goes back a few years ago now, since I haven't taught for 4 years, since I said something that obviously is true, that there were no graves and mass murder by teachers of students in Kamloops. And that is that I do what most people do, almost everybody does, and that is take a knee and accept punishment and fit in what I would consider an increasingly restrictive noose of what one can say in a school, and probably, of course, in most institutions. And by fighting against it, I realized it wasn't easy at first, but I realized that it's become rather liberating, because there are an awful lot of other Canadians, including you, because I certainly know a lot about you and your very rational views, and that is that Canada has fundamental guaranteed rights and freedoms. And I should not have been tossed as a teacher because I was off script, off the woke cult's script.
One question, Jim, why federally? So this is probably a question that people will ask you. If
Mm-hmm.
your quote unquote beef is with the education system, if that's what you're taking issue with, why not run for school board? Why federal?
Well, I would say that I'm taking issue with lots of things. I'm taking issue with land acknowledgements in school, but land acknowledgements everywhere. I'm taking issue with censorship in schools, but censorship everywhere in our society. So I don't really feel there's any sort of layer between federal, provincial, municipal issues, because they're all informed, influenced by the other. To give you perhaps a sharper answer to your question is, in schools, there are all these things that are happening that never happened before. And I don't think that has anything to do with municipal politicians, or smaller than that, school district politicians, education bureaucrats. I think it really comes down from the highest part of society, if not from the United Nations and other elites. But that's the idea that just come back to one narrow issue, and that being my case. I said that residential schools were not houses of horror, that kids weren't murdered, that they were well educated for the time, and with lots of benefits, pools and international trips and sports teams and grad events and dances and music clubs and all these things, in addition to learning, obviously, in the best way possible for the time, from educated people and so forth, in an institution where they were warm and sufficiently dressed, where they had hygiene, where they had abundance of food and all these things. Anyhow, so in schools, everybody's talking about residential schools as being places where kids were tortured and hanged and drowned and impregnated, and their children were put in incinerators. These are things that are being talked about in schools. Where does that come from? That comes from the federal government. That comes from every member of parliament who on October 27th, 2022, voted unanimously to call Canada's residential school project a genocide. So I think if one really wants to change schools, I think we need to change what's happening at the federal level, because all these leaders of our institutions, they're all looking, they're not there for anybody but themselves. And I hope everybody by now realizes that, because they pay themselves a lot of money, a lot of benefits, and they want to have even more. So it's all about padding their careers, all about getting ahead and getting up higher. And how do they do that? They mirror the ideas of the people higher than them. And so Trudeau comes in, and all of a sudden everybody's using his language, ridiculous language, like decolonialism. What the heck is decolonialism? Like, what do you mean? Like, we go back in time? Without toilets, without electricity? So these nonsensical ideas that you find in school come from above. And another issue that's important to me is literature. And so I spent a lot of time in graduate school, University of Toronto, and I, fighting against censorship of literature. Well, that's not something that a principal or a superintendent in a school district goes, well, you know what? Literature doesn't work anymore. We need to bring in anti-white graphic novels, because literature might have a word or an image or an idea that could offend a vulnerable or marginalized or oppressed person in the classroom. Therefore, get rid of Dr. Seuss and Roald Dahl and Agatha Christie and obviously very recently and most tragically for me, Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird. So this idea that we need to gut ourselves of our history, of our literature, of our art, of all the things that guided us, because that doesn't come again from a local principal or a local superintendent. That comes from on high. So we got to go after these people. And I didn't go after the PPC because I have a burning ambition to be a politician or burning ambition to do anything. I am just a teacher who's offended. I'm the one that should be most offended that I was canceled as an educator, even though I do all this extracurricular stuff for kids. I'm always working, always serving children. And I'm gone because I don't want to reproduce the daily land acknowledgements, the wearing different colored shirts, Black History Month, this past month. Like, I just don't want to be part of politics. I want to be part of education. And so how do you fight that at the municipal level, the school district level, or even the provincial level, when it's these people at the top? So today, I live in British Columbia, and I just read, just before coming on, that a huge island, they used to call it the Queen Charlotte Islands, and now it's called Haida Gwaii, has been given over by the federal government, not just the provincial, but the federal government, over to one race of people. So a large landmass in Canada is being given over, and I presume all the mineral rights, I imagine all the rights in the ocean and all the ocean floor, all around that. All this is just being given over because some people in the federal government today decided that this is what we want to do. We want to again, you have people who are, again, vulnerable, marginalized, oppressed, the words I used earlier, any group that they think can, go after and be their saviors. But what they're doing is they're stripping ordinary Canadians of the rights that they're guaranteed, equal rights and freedoms. So I don't know how you fight anything in Canada right now without taking on these woke cultists and I think authoritarian monsters like Trudeau. He wants to pretend, with residential schools that white Christians were part of the worst crimes imaginable, crimes against humanity. And I'm thinking, well, who other than white Christians went out into the wilderness to educate these kids? I didn't see anybody else. 4 of those people were people in my family. There are 4 missionaries who are ancestors of mine, and including 2 great uncles whom I met, who are incredibly dedicated people. Warren, I just couldn't imagine saying them to them. They came back. Oh, by the way, this is what we say about you guys in school now. You were only interested in imperialism, colonialism, destroying, Aboriginal culture, destroying Indigenous children. I can't, it's just, I know you agree with me. And I'm hoping that people watching this are in agreement that you don't make a country stronger by ripping it apart. This endless self introspection and deconstruction and destruction of what it is to be a Canadian. Oh, we're racist. Oh, we're genocidal. So no, I'm taking on anybody. I'm taking on anybody at any time, anywhere on this. That this isn't good for Canada. And of course, I'm not alone. I'm looking at somebody who's saying the same thing, that we went off course here. And then all of a sudden, these hypocrites, these anti-Canadians are all of a sudden and having a Flag Day.
Okay, I was gonna get to that, but let's go to the audience. First of all, Prairie, hello. One more godless woman, two regular viewers, hello. Before we went on, Snap Circuit guy said, I saw Jim when he was crushing that debate as an independent provincially. I'd be even more delighted in voting for him. He is in my riding. So you got your first voter, Jim.
And I'm honored, and I hope, I don't know the name of the person who's writing that, but I hope, because I can be found on X, that people would direct message, and I'm trying to collect, obviously, a base of those who might want to, support me. And I think what I did in the provincial running, I didn't have a chance as independent, and I entered late, but I walked out on the land acknowledgement and had someone film it for me. And that was it. People looked at me and go, why'd you do that for? And I said, because it matters. I'm against compelled speech. And they're doing that in schools to kids, and they don't have the power. They don't have the force that I do as an older person with a big mouth to say no. And so I put it on my Twitter account, and in no time it had over 100,000 views. So it does matter when people run in elections, even if we don't have good chances of winning. Who knows? But obviously I'm not a conservative or liberal, and I'd have, I guess, a better chance of running. But I don't like what they stand for. I think that PPC is the party that stands for. In fact, I looked at their program. The very first thing they talk about are rights and freedoms and civil liberties. Where are my rights and freedoms and civil liberties as a teacher when I say something is historically true and I'm out of a career?
You got some more followers here, Jim. So Eden Maury says, you're a good man, Jim. Bless you. Andrew Skinner says, welcome, Jim. Great to have you. So you're getting a lot of praise. Where were we before? You mentioned Haida Gwaii. So this issue of virtue signaling by giving land to, victim class like Indigenous, I'd like to point out that the Governor General, if I'm not mistaken, she's Inuit, and Trudeau gave 2,000 square kilometers, 20 million acres to the Inuit. Like, these decisions, they can rebound back and have profound effects.
Yeah, well, I've, if I may respond to that, in 2 ways. First of all, the people in Haida Gwaii who are not Indigenous, who are not Haida, what happens to their rights? So I don't have any problem with Indigenous people having rights, but I don't like the idea of going back to feudal times and having one class that has the land and has everybody else in vassalhood. where we have to give money endlessly, and to do so in a position of dhimmihood, the word that was used in the Muslim world. Everybody who wasn't Muslim was lower. They had to bow. You always had to be lower than somebody who was Muslim. And I think this is what they're creating in Canada, two classes of citizens. So I'm very opposed to the second thing I'd like to mention briefly, but when you mention our Governor General, well, the problem there is she is only half Indigenous. So that's something that frustrates me. I think her father's name is Bob May. So when Mary Simon, I think if she's really being honest to her own heritage, that she would say that her father was an English guy, an English name with a name like, I think, again, Bob May. I know the first name's Bob. And so this idea that she finds something in her past and her DNA, and then all of a sudden she has privileges and rights beyond what everybody else does. And so when I'm running federally, and one of the persons that responded, Eden, I've communicated with him, if it's the same Eden. And but one of the things that I've tried to do, and I know others are doing it, but there's not many of us, because and sometimes I know I'm completely alone. And that is just to question everything. And to say, if you start to judge Canadians on the basis not only of race, religion, and sex, and orientation, all this sort of stuff, but if you're doing it on the basis as well of our ancestry, and say, if you have this much, so yeah, she's half Inuit, but she's also half what I am. And I don't think just because her mother is of a different race, that she is any better than I am. She's deserving anything more than I am. And I also would say that my people were here before her mother's people. And that's something else I'm trying to do. I did lessons, history lessons, and just to show they've tried to cancel me as a teacher, but I'm still here. And because I think it's important. I think people like Wendy Mesley and Don Cherry and even Jordan Peterson, who's now left Canada. There are lots of great Canadians who got canceled and kind of shrunk away. And I don't think that's good. I think we all need to say, we've had enough. We're going to just stop, and we're going to end this. And it's going to collapse like a house of cards. So that to me is the essential point here, is her mother's family is Inuit. The people that were living in the Arctic 500 years ago were of a different group. They weren't Thule, which became Inuit. They were Dorset. And then they were extinguished. My people, I'm part Viking. My people first landed in Newfoundland as long ago as 800 AD. And there were many visits between 800 and 1000 AD, and you know about Lanzo Meadows, so we have physical evidence of it in Newfoundland. So why is it that we're talking all the time about, no one's talking about giving the English or the Viking people like me, Scott, Irish, French, whatever I am, no one's talking about giving me special rights, even though my ancestors, in some cases, were here long before the Indigenous, particularly the Iroquois that came over after 1812, the Sioux that came over after 1876, Battle of Little Bighorn, Sitting Bull and the Sioux knew they had to escape. So this idea, just the idea of even calling people Indigenous and other people non-Indigenous is fatuous. And so when I'm running in whatever I'm running in, I'm not done yet. I'm not dead. So I'll be running again somewhere, somehow, or I'll be out in the public, because I realize right now that I can no longer be what I was forever. I was just a quiet guy who went to school and worked hard to do my best for students. And that was taken away from me. So now I'm a different guy. I'm the guy that's going to be out there and saying what everyone else is afraid to say. You don't groom kids. You don't convince kids to mutilate themselves and change their sex. You don't tell kids that their opportunities in life are going to be determined by their race. You don't tell kids that indigenous knowledge is better than science. You don't tell kids literature is racist or history is all wrong. And here's what it is now as we reinvent it. Don't tell kids that academic values don't matter, democratic values, that they should that they should be telling people that they should be telling or listening every day that they're not on their own land, that the land that they're on, including their own house, is stolen. A lot of these kids are from Syria and Ukraine and all over the world, or people who were traumatized because they were deprived of their fundamental rights, property, in some cases, the life of family members. They come to Canada as a sanctuary, and you know that because of your Iranian background. The Iranians come to Canada and they think oh my gosh, this is what we wanted. And we'd still like to have it for Persia, for Iran, but Canada is better. We're freer. Look what you're able to do here and now, what you wouldn't be able to do if your family hadn't come over here. And so I'm just one of these guys that's saying anyone that comes to Canada, particularly people being here for a while, those people too are Indigenous.
So we're going to go to one of the questions, but before I do, Eden Murray says, yes, he's the same Eden. So I guess you've been in communication. And he says, your words are music to my ears, Jim. So we're going to go to Andre Malot. She's a former PPC candidate. How can we protect classical literature when young generations don't read and are indoctrinated by woke teachers? Teachers are in quotes. Why many parents don't protect the youth of their children in school?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And I think what I'm doing is important. I think there's many ways of answering that, and time is short. I would say we start by not having it removed. And I think that's the immediate fight right now because it's just disappearing. When I was in Abbotsford in the rough 2 years that I had there, they wouldn't allow me to read Agatha Christie's, and then there were none for my grade 9 students, even though the department head said to me, that's the most popular book in grade 9. And I said, why can't we read it? And she said, oh, because there's a word in it that somebody complained about. And I said, there isn't that word, the N word. And she said, well, 100 years ago, it was there in the title. And I said, well, the title is different today. It's not 10 little. And words, it's then there were none. Oh, that doesn't matter. So because of that, because one person made a complaint, none of the kids can read what they want to read. And then they show me what they're reading now, and I'm going, oh my gosh, okay, look, this is not literature. This is not something that's esteemed for its form or effect. So the next thing here is saying, so the very first thing is to keep the books in schools, to go in and complain and to fight the teachers and the principals and the superintendents and all these other people who are, they're not illiterate. Many of them are highly literate and smart people, but they've succumbed. They've surrendered morally to wokeism. And the next thing is, and I'm fighting the indoctrination, obviously. And the last question here is, why many parents don't protect the youth of their children in schools? Well, that's what I'm saying here, and I think it's absolutely essential. Why is it that parents? Oh my gosh, I know my wife in particular. I was always nice to my kids' teachers, being a teacher myself, and I always say, like my parents did, if my kid does anything wrong, you let me know, and I'm gonna, have strong words for my kid. I'm 100% in your corner, Mr. and Mrs. Teacher, and you kind of thought, I thought that was normal. And my wife was, oh my gosh, if anything ever happened to our kids in school that was wrong, she was there within minutes. What's happened to this generation of parents? Why are they allowing this to happen? Having teachers saying to them, well, what are your pronouns? First thing kids learn, they go into kindergarten in so many schools and districts, including in Surrey, where I live and taught for so long, in Abbotsford, I taught for a little while. The very first thing teachers are told to do at all grades in elementary school is to ask kids what their pronouns are. And it's sort of like this, if it's a kid who's going they. If it's a kid saying, well, I'm confused sexually. I'm not sure if I'm a boy or a girl, so what should I call myself? Like the teacher just goes, oh my gosh, and phones the principal and says, we got another trans kid. Woohoo! Run that up the flagpole. And that's
they put the cross mark on the wall, like.
Well, that's what it is. Yeah, that's right. It's sort of like men that sleep with women, they put marks on the bedpost. That's what they do with trans kids in schools. They just be, and because this is, it's the idea that they're able to exalt these kids. And with Indigenous kids is particularly evident because in every school, and certainly in the schools in Abbotsford, every school has an Indigenous department. So they have regular department for English, math, science, whatever. And then they have for just the Indigenous kids. And most of those kids are part Indigenous. Most Indigenous in Canada are very small part Indigenous. And they take these kids out and they bring them in and they give them special cultural type things, whether it's smudging or learning how to make a fish hook out of bone. And they do these things. And I'm going, they're taking those kids out of English and science and history and all these other academic classes. And then they say, oh, we're all racist because those kids aren't doing as well as some other groups. Well, I think the way to help Indigenous people, and I want to help Indigenous people as much as any group, but I don't care about groups, to be frank. I care about individuals, but every kid in the class matters immensely to me because the parents have entrusted that child with me for a few hours every day. And so what I would do is say to kids that are taken out to be in special Indigenous programming, I would say, well, are you helping or are you hurting those kids? Because I think you're hurting them. I think we have created a consensus as a society of what kids should learn in school, numeracy, literacy, and so forth. So if you take them out and teach them how to make a paddle, I don't really think that you're going to make that kid successful in science going to university.
We got another comment from your biggest fan, Eden Murray. Here in the North, First Nation kids are really impacted by the transgender movement, despite not being our traditional ways. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I think it's all over Canada, and one could make an argument the most vulnerable kids. They don't go after. I met a woman yesterday at a PPC function, my first function, and she was asking about the trans thing in school, and I looked at her, and she just had everything going for her, in looks and intelligence and manner and just insight and just everything about her. She just had everything going for her, and that if that's people look for in others. And I said, the very first thing I want to say to you is someone like you wouldn't experience what the trans kids go through because they don't go after the kids that are secure, the kids that come from good families, the kids that don't worry about where their next meal is going to come from, who don't have to listen to their parents fighting and being drunk at night. It's the kids that don't fit in, that get picked up. And I would say in the North, particularly in Native communities, Indigenous communities, there's a higher number of kids that are feeling that social dislocation or feeling who've had a rough life already and don't know how they can fit in easily. They might be depressed, they might be isolated, they might have nothing to do, they might have parents that whatever it is. I don't think kids in Indigenous communities have an easy time generally today. I think that's true for a lot of kids everywhere, but certainly it's as true or more true for the kids in those isolated reserves. So that's why the trans thing is going to have success, because what it does for kids, it's a drug. It's an educational drug. It's saying, oh, hey kid, you're depressed, or you're not fitting in, or you look unhappy, you have suicidal ideation. All these things is wrong. You have problems with obesity, you have problems with acne, you have problems with this, that, and everything else. You don't have friends. Hey, why don't you join our club? Why don't you meet with us? And all of a sudden it's just open grooming. And they call the club, something like Gay Straight Alliance, or they'll have different names for it. But they'll bring these kids in and they'll start to say to them that maybe the answer is, because in every school now, they purposely hire teachers who are gender different, who are sexually quite deviant, in my view, and pansexuals and all sorts of types. And so there's always one in a school, particularly a high school, who's going, who's trying to find kids to identify with for him or herself. And so it's just open recruitment. And I know this is true, and no one's ever challenged me on this. And I respond to people who direct message me. But no one's ever challenged me in that, because they know it's true. Because I just say, just do the research. And I say, but before you even start to that, know that I had a parent in Abbotsford that wrote a letter to me. And she said that 4 of her daughter's closest friends are transitioning. So we're not talking about 1 in 100,000, which would be gender dysphoria. We're talking 1 in every classroom, and sometimes more. And so it's not, didn't happen by accident. And so the North is particularly, those kids are particularly vulnerable. And the number one concern, as I know people who work in those communities, the number one concern is suicide. You know, and the drug taking and the sniffing of glue and whatever. All these things are manifestations of children being deeply depressed. And it's also a tough age. One of my 3 children, you know, had a hard time with depression. And so I think we have to be very concerned about that. But the answer isn't in changing body parts, because that could take one's depression and inflate it, not deflate it. So it's not anyhow. Sorry if I've talked too much.
No, it's okay. Another comment from Andre Maloche. Very good explanation about vulnerable children who are targeted by toxic ideologies promoted by people with mental disorders. Andre has a way with words. So.
Well, more articulate than I, but that's it.
Again, Andrew Skinner, Jim has some great insight. My question, what we're talking about right now, what you're exposing or discussing, what's going on in the schools. I know you're a new PPC candidate, but with what you've talked to the voters, or maybe just casual conversation with parents, specifically mothers, how does this resonate with them? Do they say, yes, you know, Jim, I agree with you, I'm scared to speak out? Or they're like, oh, Jim, you're just, you know, you're a conspiracy theorist?
I don't get into conversations with people that I don't know. I'd like to. It's just it's so rare. How do you do it? Even I'll just talk about a family party. I could have a family party where I could be sitting, as I have, with a niece or a nephew, someone I don't see for a while, and they say to me, "Oh, Uncle Jim, you know, I've heard about what happened to you, and I'm following, and I know your story and what you're doing, and you have all these people following you, and you're in a documentary film seen by millions of people, and all these things," and going, okay, you're making a difference. And I'm going, I can talk about some of my family. And then a second later, that kid's parent comes in, sits beside and changes the subject, or just walks the kid away. I'm demonized by people in my own family and friend group, but not in an impolite way. But I mean, most of my friends don't ever talk about my politics. But I'm only talking about my politics is because it destroyed my career. If we don't talk about woke authoritarianism, then it's going to come for others too. And so I'm not making money being on your show today. I haven't made any money in 4 years by being kicked out of the school system. So I'm not doing this for self. Yeah, it might help me in my case, and I'm going to win my case. But everyone's delaying my case for years, because they have no evidence of wrongdoing. I certainly have a lot of evidence of their wrongdoing. So they're just delaying it. You know, they have the power. Obviously, I don't. But I believe that I'm onto something, and you're onto something. And I think the PPC is on to something, because Maxime Bernier, you know, he's has it ear to the ground. The Conservative Party is not listening to these concerns. Now, I know the Conservative Party is representing a lot of important concerns, and I'm not here in any way to criticize any party, frankly. I'm here to present myself. But the alternative for people like me, people that believe in traditional democratic values in a country, are not going to be with the liberals, because they're woke communists. and worse. I think they're pathologically maniacal. But the Conservative Party, a lot of people say, oh, well, this party is going to represent important change and it's going to bring back this, that, and everything else. And recently the leader, Pierre Poilievre, talked about that he's against all the grooming in schools. And I thought to myself, I've been fighting this for 10 years. I've been telling conservative candidates, conservative politicians for 10 years. Why did it take 10 years? Did they really have to wait until the poll numbers were such before they acted? And then my particular issue relating to, waiting to giving rights to Indigenous people beyond everybody else. They won't go near it. I said to them, well, residential schools were positive for most of the kids. In fact, it kept them alive because many of the kids in residential schools, particularly in later years, were there because they were being abused or starved or completely abandoned in the household on the reserve. So this is what those schools were doing. They were early child services, public child services. So it's to me, it's a fascinating thing. I've got an important message. I don't believe the Conservative Party is honest about so much as happening in schools. They just do what politicians do. Some lie every 3 seconds. Most duck from controversial issues and just hope it doesn't come up ever in a question. And I'm a teacher, and we've got problems with the indoctrination in race and gender and indigenization and censored literature, falsification of history, and blah, 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 all these things they're saying. And we're losing academic standards. We're compelling kids to do this, that, and everything, whether it's wearing shirts or standing for, stolen land. All these things we're doing in schools, and you're not talking about it. That's not good enough for me. And then you look at the PPC, and I talk to people, including Maxime, and he's going, well, I respect you. I respect your views. That's why we've asked you to one of the things, because we know that you're an intelligent person and also a person who seeks consensus. And I don't ever, if someone said something to me, go, well, you're wrong about this. They actually dug up graves somewhere and they found kids that were murdered by teachers. I would say, well, then for the last 5 years of my life, I was wrong. 4 years, I would say that because I'm a man of science, as most of us are. I don't make opinions based on nothing. And so, look, I think I have a lot to say, but when you go out in the provincial election with literature, I did it as independent then, and start passing to people, you'll meet some people that are wanting to talk, but only for a short time. And most people go, oh, thank you, or ignore you. Some give you the finger, whatever it is. Like, it's not an easy place. But I found an opportunity. They had one meeting, one all candidates meeting when I ran provincially in BC. And in that one meeting, I was able to reach hundreds of thousands of people because I posted on the things that I said in the meeting. I did a number of posts on what I said in the meeting, things that everybody else wasn't saying, starting with the pronoun I. I was the only person among all the candidates, because there was a number of writings together, that used the word I. Everybody else was going we, because you're so programmed by their party to hear your talking points. Don't stray. If you stray in any way, we could be kicked out, whatever. We're going to practice with you for 5 hours before you go into the all candidates meeting. And this is exactly what you say. I know that because I ran federally before for the Liberals 11 years ago. So less than that. More than that. I was in 2005 and 6, so almost 20 years ago. And so almost 20 years ago. So I know how much they want to package you. So in this election, I know that most people will be too busy to stop and chat. Most people won't go to my website, which is my X account where I post things. Most people will never have a conversation with me, but some will, and that's good. So I'm going to be going around and working hard. And so I'm not meaning walking the streets isn't a good thing, and getting word out that way. But I think the key for me is going to be whenever they have a public event, because I'm going to do something that no politician in Canada is willing or strong enough to do. no politician or candidate. I'm going to walk out if there's a land acknowledgement. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to raise my voice if anybody talks about any program for one race of children, but not for all races of children, or one gender orientation, or anything that discriminates against other children. I'm going, or other people. I'm going to stand up and object to anything that is counter to the basic and guaranteed rights and freedoms in our Constitution. So that's how I'm going to. Well, am I going to win? I know it's hard, obviously, and hope somebody in the PPC wins. I'm going to try, but I know it's hard. But I am going to. I'm going to make a splash, and I know that because I had one in the last election. Just before the last election, I had one post, one tweet that had 1.3 million views, and so. It's not that I'm out there trying to do something outrageous. Hey, look at me, everybody. Because the comments that came through were going, thank goodness there's somebody. A lovely comment by Eden there about all equals in this land. I would never be, oh, you're a racist. No, gosh, I would hate it if white people had privileges that other people didn't have. I would disown everybody that was white if that were the case. I just don't believe that you create a good society or a good world if you don't treat people with equal dignity. So I think in this election, I'm going to make waves. I'm going to make waves without breaking the law, without doing something outlandish. In my mind, I'm simply going to do something that others are too afraid of, and that is, in most cases, just simply telling the truth. That my people are as indigenous as anybody else. I think if my people started coming here in 800 AD, and that's what we know. For all we know, they could have been the first people here. There's a Solutrean solution. There's lots of theories out there that Europeans were the first in Americas. It wasn't people coming, Siberians coming across the Bering Strait, the land bridge there during the last ice age. So I'm going to be saying things that a lot of people, I think, will say, yeah, that resonates with me. Because what politicians do, again, is duck. They want to have everybody going, oh, the big problem in Canada today is tariffs. Well, the tariffs aren't even here. But, all these horrible 25% tariffs, whatever, and there always are tariffs, and there always will be tariffs. So I'm not going to get caught up in any public parade, that's going to serve the people at the top. And all of a sudden you see people like Chrystia Freeland pretending she's this great, or Trudeau pretending he's this great patriot when he canceled Canada Day, after the grave hoax in Kamloops, canceled Canada Day for all Canadians. He's done more to harm Canada than anybody else in my lifetime. Our spirit, our sense of unity, our anyhow.
Sorry, I wasn't laughing at you. I was just reading the comments.
I talk too much. I apologize for that.
No, it's okay. Let's go to the comments. By the way, whenever there's a lot of comments in an episode, that means that people are actually, they like what the guest is saying. So you're doing good.
Well, it can challenge me too. I'm not thin-skinned.
No, there's no challenging questions today. Andre Meloche says, Mr. McMurtry, you are not alone to be demonized. We stand next to you. Thank you for your commitment.
That's
from there, we'll go to Prairie, and I'll give a follow-up question. Have either of you run into Billboard Chris? So that's a question for you. Have you run into him?
I know him personally.
Oh, there you go. So that's a hard yes, Prairie.
Can I tell you the story? I'll just take 30 seconds. Yeah. You see, I fear again because I'm living this. Every day I'm not at work. I'm not making money. And I'm feeling sorry for myself a little bit because I was good in a school. And so this is always in the back of my head. And but a bigger part of me obviously is feeling a great pride in that I again have Conrad Black writing the foreword for my book on my case, that I'm going to be giving that book to the people who assassinated my reputation. And nothing is negative. And I don't talk about individuals. It's all about ideas. And in this time, I'm going to continue to fight, as the people are that are watching this, for the things that we grew up with. So let me tell you just really quickly about Chris. So I lost my job. I was quiet for a while. I was depressed. I was told that I should see somebody. I said, that's silly. I'm a strong guy. But I ended up seeing somebody. And because it's hard to go from you're providing for your children and grandchildren to all of a sudden not having work at a time when my wife couldn't work because of cancer. So it was a rough, when was it now? 4 years ago, man, it wasn't easy at first. All of a sudden, here are two people, with mortgage and everything else, big family, already 5 grandchildren, and you go, neither of us is working. And it just seemed so unjust to me because I was the only teacher in Canada. The only person, I was the first, because I said it right away when the news came out. It's not true. And kids died from disease, and there aren't graves, and there was never murder. It wasn't ever in the heart of any Canadian teacher, certainly a Christian teacher. So I felt really low. And then after a while, I got myself back to where I was, which is a strong guy. And I said, okay, bring it on. And my union said, well, we can get you back in the classroom if you take a knee, if you do this, apologize, whatever. We'll give you a little bit of money, or we'll give you a little less punishment than you think. All these incentives, they've done this for years. And I thought about it. And I said, no. And they said, well, it's the hill you're going to die on. You'll never be back in the classroom. And I said, well, I'd rather die like a man on my feet than a slave on my knees. And I said, I feel sorry for anybody that's going to be opposed to me here, because I have evidence, because I'm an intellectual in the sense that I spend time gathering evidence. So I don't say things to kids that are false. What my employer who fired me, or the people who fired me, did is they were saying all sorts of things to kids that were false, and not just about residential schools, but about Canadian history generally. And I said, well, bring it on. And I said, I don't care where it goes. And obviously it's taken a lot longer than I expected. I may croak before this is over. So when I started, I said, picked myself up and said, okay, I'm on my own. I didn't tell even my own parents for 2 years because I didn't think they'd be happy with me. They'd be embarrassed by me. Their son was fired. My dad was the Chief Justice of Ontario. Hardly wanted to have a kid that was fired. And and they're lovely people, but I didn't tell them. I lied about being teaching for 2 years. So then I pick up the phone and I hear about somebody, or on X maybe I heard about somebody, and contact the person. I said, who can I talk to? And I was guided to a couple of people, but I wanted to focus on Chris. And they said to me, well, we can maybe be of help in this way, and that was great. And all of a sudden I felt I wasn't alone. Then I get a phone call from some guy named Chris, not Billboard Chris Elstoy. I'm saying his name because to me he's just Billboard Chris. And I didn't even know who he was. And he said, I live in Surrey, right near where you live. And he said, you want to go for a coffee? I didn't know who the heck Billboard Chris was. And that wasn't that long ago, if you can believe it. And so about 3 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 3 years. And so we met at a Dairy Queen in Coverdale, where I live. And he just said a few things to make me feel better about myself. He said, you get on X, and just gave me some advice. That guy is now meeting with Trump and going to being a guest at the White House, being on Fox News, and traveling the world and changing the world. That's the same guy that I didn't even know who the heck he was when he walked in the Dairy Queen. I went, could you be Chris, the guy that called me? And then there was one situation where I put out a post, didn't do very well, but it was something about showing about grooming, that Starbucks was giving money to employees who had children that were transitioning. If you can believe it. And so that was right on the coffee cup. And someone sent it to me. It was in Toronto. Someone sent it to me, a friend from high school, and I posted. Didn't do very well at all. And then Chris contacted me, and we'd been in touch, from time to time. And he said, Jim, could I take your picture and use it for a post for myself? And I said, well, of course, Chris, I've got your back, you got my back. We're all in this together about trying to do what's right for kids. And I said, don't put a credit in for me. Just do it. He put a credit in for me. And it was close to 1 million views the last time I checked. And so he's looked out for me. So whatever people know about Billboard Chris, they might not know. He's loyal to them that brung, you dance with them that brung you. He's loyal. He's a guy that is purely, is extraordinarily principled. I think, when you think of an Order of Canada, he'd probably be the last person to get it, but by far the most deserving.
He has done really good work. I have to admit, he's very, very strong-willed individual. He's got a lot of courage. There was another comment back here. Let me know. Tell me what you think about this. One more godless woman. Meant aside, the process of systematically altering beliefs and attitudes, especially through the use of drugs, torture, or psychological stress techniques and brainwashing. She's talking about what they're doing to students in the schools.
Yeah, and if I could say that the main way they're brainwashing is through lying. And I want to make the point, they're lying in saying that, in my particular case, for example, kids were tortured and murdered and left out in the snow to die. That's what one kid said when I answered her and then was walked out by 2 vice principals. A lie takes many forms. A lie can just be telling one part of the story. Because in residential schools back in time, I'm sure there were bad things that happened. There was a teacher who was preying on kids at my school when I was in high school, and he ended up being arrested. And I learned about that because it was a private school, and the private school wrote everybody in the community, including grads, old boys as they're called, and said that this was happening, and we're doing everything in our power to help those who are victimized. And if you were victimized yourself, and please contact us, and we'll provide every support at no cost. That was just school. It was Upper Canada College in Toronto. It's my parents been there a couple of years. They thought they'd make something out of me by doing it, and obviously they were wrong. But every school has problems. I have in the time that I've been a teacher, I have been to probably 10 funerals of children, most of whom have died at the school. And so kids die. So residential schools were not for every child a happy place. But that, anyhow, so if you're going to talk about residential schools, don't lie to them. Don't even start off by saying houses of horror. Don't say that kids died of disease, and certainly don't say things that are untrue, like they weren't given a proper burial, or that they were buried at school, because they weren't buried at the school. They're buried in their home community. And but the main one here is the omission. Is if you say to kids something, but you are consciously omitting the biggest part of the story. So if I said my family, which is largely in Toronto, that's where I'm from, but it's all over the place, including in the US now. My family, is full of drunks, because we have an uncle who drinks too much. What would kids take from that? They would take, Mr. McMurtry's family is, but then they would think about it for a second. But if you said to them, but he's human, and he's not, I'm making it up. I'm just making this up, but the uncle thing. But I'm just saying, I say, that's not the only guy in my family with problems. There are lots of people who struggle in one way or another, as we do in every family. But look at the good. And then I start telling people about, look, yeah, I know my cousin this and my whatever. My grandmother, I know she didn't like Catholics. She didn't. And so my point is, that's there in every family. That's there in every society. If you're talking to kids, you Just be honest with them. Give an honest account. You say residential schools, like any other schools, they had challenges. We know better today. You know, there are all sorts of problems. Of course, but why are we talking about problems? Let's talk about let's talk about the things they did. They gave people who didn't have an education literacy, numeracy, hygiene, food, clothing that wasn't full of lice and other bugs. And they gave kids a chance to make it in the modern world. That's how I just start a conversation about residential schools or about anything. I wouldn't go, if there was racism in society, I wouldn't start saying, oh, Canada's racist. I would say, well, Canada's not racist. Look at our laws, look at our institutions, look at how, you know, teachers are in schools generally. You know, you're supposed to not judge on these things, at least in the old days. So you go to the hospital, they don't go, oh, you're this color, you know, we'll deal with you tomorrow. We're a good country. Then I would say, yeah, you know, of course we have problems with racism. Every society does, and we always will. People are always going to have negative things to say and about other people. It's a way of making them feel better about themselves.
So to the audience, unfortunately, we can't get to all the questions. One thing I wanted to ask you, Jim, you mentioned that you went to an event yesterday. How was that? How many people turned up, and you know, what was the mood?
The mood was really good. I'm feeling more than ever before that I'm with my people. And when I mean my people, I mean at this time in Canadian history, we don't need a national railway from one end of the country to the other. We don't need, we're not starving, so we don't need to worry about create, you know, more agricultural land in northern Alberta or whatever. Like, there's challenges that we went through as a country that we're not dealing with anymore. The challenge we're dealing with today is this, to me, above all others, is this, particularly in our institution, is this really ugly woke communism that is wanting to put everyone in groups and wanting to have the groups fight against each other. And everybody in the room, people of all different whatever, everybody looked different in that room. Nobody was talking about his or her group. We were just talking about how to make things better. Well, if we have a problem, well, whatever it is, it was not bringing it down to identity. I just think that is just so stupid that in this day and age, when you have, particularly with Indigenous people, you have so many challenges, including a lot of kids ending their lives. Why are we taking them back in history and giving them a false version of it? Why don't we create the resources and the possibilities and the dreams that these kids need to survive?
Sorry, I'm just putting up.
This is interesting. Me and my white supremacy. Well, Gilbert, this is what I'm saying. This is what they're doing in schools. So if you had To Kill a Mockingbird, which they've taken out, then you would hear from the brightest people in the world. And I'm telling you, the example, most people, of course, have read it, but the example of Atticus or Tom Robinson or Boo Radley, even Jem Finch, the girl of 8, like, they had so much wisdom to spread. Well, if you're replacing a book like To Kill a Mockingbird with a book, you know, it's all about racism and how bad white people are, it's not just that's ugly and racist in itself, it's that the kids are being deprived of Atticus and Boo, Tom and Jem, and Scout Finch, particularly Scout. That's what you do by what wokeism does is it just tightens the noose on what people can say, think, or do. It just limits us intellectually and socially. It's a really awful thing, particularly when education itself is derived from Greek words meaning to develop and to lead out. It's all this idea of opening up a world to kids, to explore and to see and again to reimagine. How can we do this? So yeah, people say to me, oh, that's not a federal issue. It is a federal issue. It is the most important federal issue. And that's why Maxime Bernier and the PPC put it as number one in their literature. Rights and freedoms and civil liberties. You saw it during the trucker convoy. You saw it during the some very excessive and dystopian COVID regulations or restrictions. Well, I went to a hospital twice. This is only 2 years ago, and to get blood, and both do a blood test. Both times I was asked if I was pregnant. When I think of how overcrowded hospitals are, don't waste your time asking if a guy in his 60s who's think he's somewhat fit is pregnant, and he's clearly a guy. And don't insult me and say that that I could be a pregnant female, but they do that. And I said to the nice young nurse on both occasions, I said, I'm not you. It's come up with that, and I can't do it right now because I was both cases I was quite weak from hip surgery. But I said, if you could kindly tell others that I've been deeply offended by that question, and I'm not going to answer it. If everybody going into a hospital, every man in the hospital who was asked if he's pregnant, because that's what they did at this hospital, then it would end by the end of the day. It's just, why is it that parents, as one of your viewers asked, why is it at the beginning of this episode, why is it that people, Canadians, particularly parents, are going along with this?
Jim, just to end the episode, could you tell people where they can follow you, learn more about you, and where can they donate to you?
Oh,
I can answer that for you if you don't know.
Yeah, I don't know the donate.
Typically, they can donate through the People's Party. If they go there and they find you, there's a donate link at the bottom of your profile page.
So they go to the People's Party of Canada and they donate to they can donate to the candidate.
Usually, yes.
I'm gonna find that answer out right now, and I will post it. But
we'll figure it out together.
That would be helpful.
That's Jim with a J?
Yeah, but for my own case, they don't take any money. I refuse money from anybody on my case. And I do that in moral principle.
Oh, you're running in Cloverdale, Langley City. I guess Ian Kennedy moved to a different riding. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So you click on donate. And I'm not quite sure how it works, but we'll go with credit card. And you get to here, and just as a joke, I'd like to cover the transaction fee. Sure. Hey, I can't. Well, 400. Continue. Yeah, and then you just put your name. I won't put my credit card number, otherwise people are going to steal it. And I believe this goes directly to your campaign, or they'll reimburse you. If not, you just you figure out a way to claw your money back.
Okay, I'm going to post on I will post on X how to do that. And so to answer your, thank you very much to that very kind person. But again, I won't take any money for my case. I'm going to win my case. It's going to take 6 years probably. I'm going to do it all without taking anybody else's money. But I do ask one thing for other people, and that is to care and to do what they can, as obviously your viewers are doing. And this person writing here about a provincial government has given up her sovereignty to the UNDRIP. Yeah, it's just absolutely awful. I know, Gary.
Sorry, Jim. I didn't know if we had enough time, but I really wanted to bring up this comment from Gary. Gary's a supporter of mine. He's a very smart man. It goes back to what you said at the beginning, the land declarations, Haida Gwaii giving up our land. what Gary is saying is that this UNDREP level is it's hit things like free ski passes for you based on the color of your skin, and he's tying it back to apartheid in South Africa.
Yeah, I've communicated many times with Gary. He's a great guy and very smart, but he also he really has his eye on the ball. So I've learned from him, and I appreciate that he's honoring me by listening.
There you go, Gary. Your efforts did not go unnoticed. We appreciate your work. Well, Jim, I guess we can call it an episode, and then you and I can talk afterwards.
Well, I would like that, because you could help me with a few things.
I'll try my best. Well, to the rest of the audience, goodbye and have a great day.
Thank you so much.